of occupational therapists has identified the imperative and obligation for all occupational therapists to address systemic discrimination, oppression, and injustices such as racism, and to promote occupational rights. Meeting this obligation demands the transformation of a profession that has demonstrated little interest in systemic racism as a determinant of occupation and manifestation of occupational injustice. Systemic racism refers to the ways in which entrenched structures or systems of policies and practices embed inequities in all aspects of life, determining the availability of life chances and choices, and preserving the unearned advantages and opportunities of white people. My aim in this short paper is to support those working to build an occupational therapy that refuses to collude in perpetuating injustices and that promotes occupational rights. And because I'm talking about injustice, I'm acknowledging my position as a white, straight, temporarily non-disabled, cis female. I know that I derive material benefits, occupational advantages, and social privileges from my white skin and able body that I have never sought and have not earned. But this is how privilege works. Racism is an injustice deeply rooted in a colonial past and present, a consequence of the desire to dominate and exploit. Colonialism was advanced through the construction of hierarchical classificatory systems that positioned white people as superior to all others, and that imposed binary genders, positioning men as superior to women while entrenching heteronormativity. For occupational therapists, this is important knowledge because racism is interlinked with and intersects with ableism, sexism, and gender binarism. Each reflects an ideology that upholds certain bodies as normal and appropriate, that upholds as natural the inequitable privileges and advantages that flow to those with white, able, cis male bodies. Each effectively limits the occupational opportunities and choices of those who do not conform to these constructed norms. Each is implicated in the perpetuation of poverty. A significant body of epidemiological research has revealed the toxic impact of systemic racism on the health and well-being of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Compared to dominant white populations, those rendered vulnerable to systemic racism exhibit worse physical and mental health, inequitable access to healthy environments, healthy food and healthcare resources, and reduced life expectancies. Thus, epidemiologists assert that systemic racism is a determinant of health. Occupation, like health, is socially determined. Evidence demonstrates that racism and sexism, class and caste inequities, patriarchy and misogyny, ableism and disableism, heteronormativity and gender binarism, that are all well-documented determinants of health and well-being, are also determinants of occupational engagement. Indeed, occupational injustices arising from systemic racism expose some white lies promoted within occupational therapy. That occupational engagement is a product of individual will and ability, and that all people can choose, shape, and orchestrate their daily occupations. Occupational therapy is dominated by theories and models of practice derived from a white, Eurocentric, Judeo-Christian, urban, middle-class, heteronormative, and ableist viewpoint, presenting this unique white perspective as the norm, the standard, the universal viewpoint. Critical analysis reveals the privileged blind spots embedded in our white northern theories that have obscured inequities such as racism and their impact on occupation. These white theories, which have been imposed on the global South, congruent with colonialism's racist practices, have provided a flawed basis for occupational therapist practices and an inadequate foundation for a profession obligated to promote occupational rights. Congruent with these flawed theories, the profession has focused most of its attention on addressing individual deficits and dysfunctions while overlooking the deficits of the dysfunctional environment. Thus, for example, in the global North, occupational therapists working to improve employment outcomes for racialized people with spinal cord injury have often limited their focus to individual behaviors and abilities, overlooking racist and ableist barriers to employment, such as discriminatory transportation options and inequitable educational opportunities. This ignores existing employment disparities between white people and racial minorities, even in the presence of equivalent educational attainment, and the substantial differences in earnings among disabled white and disabled Black people, even when employment is attained. Clearly, focusing on changing individuals makes occupational therapists complicit in maintaining the structural dimensions of employment discrimination and the inequitable employment advantages that accrue to white able-bodied people. If we are to evolve into a profession that promotes occupational rights, we must end our pretense of being apolitical, disentangle our profession from its deep colonial roots, and refuse to individualize problems that are rooted in systemic injustices. Merci beaucoup.